What is the Rett syndrome?
Well, the Rett syndrome is pretty common. It tends to happen on a daily basis. It's about the insecurity of the artist. It's that feeling when you tell the artist, let's record. And you just go ahead, and the artist says, no, stop, I'm not ready. I'm not quite ready as yet. So that's part of the whole experience.
Maybe it's better
So the best is just not to say
not to
anything.
warn the artist.
That would be the most logical thing. But it's also a way that the artist should know that from that moment onwards we're recording. But what happens? What we normally do in most studios, or at least with those who are more experienced, is that part of the magic involved, that the artist is going to show his magic in those first few instances, the first takes. The first takes are usually the best, and sometimes it's best just to record without saying anything.
Do you work psychologically if you know that person somehow to make them feel relaxed? Do you trick them
No, it's
somehow?
not a question of cheating him. It's not a question of tricking him. It's just telling him, let's stop for a second, let's have a chat and go over what we've done and see what you think. So you're already distracting the artist from being hyper-concentrated in what he's doing. Then when he gets into the booth, then probably the next take, it'll come out really well. Why? Because he's just been able to disconnect with what he's done before and he's not obsessed with it anymore.
Have you ever recorded the artist without him knowing about it and just said, that's it, that's perfect, that'll work, without him knowing about it?
Yes, of
Then
course.
he listens to it and says, I couldn't do this again.
Yes, of course. Because he doesn't know that it's being recorded at that particular instance, he's relaxed and he's not worried. We all get nervous. I get nervous. When I start recording, I get nervous, and I know I press rec, and I know the moment I press it, and there's not enough time, or I come in too late. We all get nervous when we see that famous red light shining, the rec light.
Okay, let's get to the voices then. This is the part that most people might be more interested in, because we're talking about voice actors and whatnot. Nowadays, 90% of the actors and speakers have equipment at their homes because it's more affordable.
Yeah, of course, that's true. It's so much easier today.
That's right. So what should people have in mind when they want to record some audio or text or whatever? What are the basics? What should they know?
Well, first of all, how to connect all the instruments. What's the chain involved in order for the computer and for the information to work so that you can work properly with that audio? So you have to know, you've got to start from zero, the basics. You have to know how to connect the microphone, where it needs to get connected to the sound card, whether you have a preamp, and it has to go through the preamp, and then it goes into the sound card, and then to the computer, and then we have the information inside the computer. That would be the basic, the essential.
Okay, so once we have that, everything is connected and works perfectly. What should they be looking for in order to have a good recording? If it's a smooth voice or very bright, that it doesn't punish the ears. Because they have to send the client a quality product with a decent sound.
Correct.
Should they equalize the
Precise.
track or compress?
Well, there are a few steps beforehand, which I usually recommend to everyone. First of all, mic technique. That's perhaps the most important thing. If it's just a question of a voice, then there's not that much behind it. You just have to be about maybe a hand, a palm of a hand before it, in front of the microphone. If it's a large diaphragm microphone, and if it's sensitive enough, then maybe, but just perhaps the palm of your hand. And perhaps keeping the volume of keeping the volume correct, keeping your voice your mouth just in front of the microphone, then you have to keep an eye on the gain of the microphone. And that's where you can make serious mistakes.
There is a theory about microphones, excuse me, that in order to, let's say, open the singer's throat, you have to position the microphone a little bit higher so that he moves his head and sings with an open throat.
Correct.
Right?
That's right. Yes, of course. No, there's a lot of sense behind that. The neck has to look up. It has to be stretched, so that's the best position to have your neck, so that you can transmit or project the sound correctly. So the thorax has to be able to expand correctly, so you look up a little bit.
Right.
You don't want to overstretch your neck, but you can't sort of do it as if you were lying down on the floor, but you have to sort of be looking up a little bit so that your mic technique is correct and your mouth is slightly above the microphone. So you're just looking slightly above your eyes. So you're just stretching your neck a little bit, and your throat opens up a bit better.
So they sit down in front of the computer and they have a software. It could be the widely and internationally known Pro Tools, which is the one you use. But of course you can also choose
It doesn't matter, anyone.
Audacity or Logic Pro or...
That depends on the individual. They all do the same thing.
Okay, so do you equalize the voice before you record or just do a basic EQ and just play with it later?
If you're sure about what the concept is, of what you're doing, what exactly is the purpose of your recording, and if the technician and the sound engineer knows exactly what they're doing, then if you equalize before, well, you'll save the time afterwards. It depends exactly what you want to get. Sometimes if you equalize before, it's good. It depends.
Right,
After
it's
the
refining.
recording, well, you have to then, of course, pass the EQ. But if you EQ it beforehand and you get the right idea, if you get what you want, then that's fine.
I guess not. Is there a formula or something anybody could use so they can achieve a certain type of EQ for their voices? Should he try to find how he sounds or she sounds, recognize themselves when they listen?
That would be the most correct thing. When you have an artist, what you like to achieve is with the right equalization, it could be a very dangerous tool. You could completely distort the person's voice in a way that it would never be like the original. For example, just to give you an example, if you have a singer, if he signs up with a particular company because his voice has a certain personality, well, you need to make sure that the voice on the record sounds like him.
Be the most faithful possible to him.
You want to remove the residual from the voice, the sort of something that doesn't get into the voice because it doesn't really fulfill any purpose.
We're talking from 0 to 100 hertz, right?
For example, yes.
No, but it's good. It's good because I wanted to ask you about this because the other day a friend of mine was asking me. We were hanging out with someone you know very well, Dr. Casado.
Oh yes, a good friend of mine too.
And he was telling me, I don't know what they were talking about. I think audition. I'm telling you this so you get a picture of how little I know about this. I was saying, okay, until 180 or 60 hertz, we take it out. It's all useless noise, really. It's unnecessary.
Basically, it doesn't really fulfill any purpose. It's just a range where there's 2 or 3 instruments that fit in that band. And the voice isn't one of them, unless, of course,
Something
you want to
special.
do something special or specific to give it a special effect.
Reverb, the famous app. It seems to be, everybody seems to like it when they start using it. They like to listen to it. They love it.
Yeah, a lot
Right.
of fans of reverb.
But you have to be subtle
Yeah.
using it because singing, you use it to amplify the voice or give it some depth.
It's just to generate space.
Right, but if you are reading, you don't normally use it.
Not really. You don't really use it that much. We go back to what we were talking about before. You've just got to. I'm always going to say the same thing. It depends what you want to do. If you want to generate a sound of somebody that's a certain distance from you, well, the best tool, and you don't have the the right sort of acoustics.
Doesn't
You
give
don't
it
have
to
the
you.
acoustics that'll give you that. Well, then you can, generate a reverb, and if you control the parameters correctly, you will get a certain reverb, as if that person who's shouting isn't really right next to you.
Let's say, for example, in a spot or an ad,
Yeah.
would you use reverb? And don't tell me, oh, that it depends on.
It depends. It depends what you want. You're talking about the voice, right? That's, it depends really. It depends what you want to achieve. It's always the main thing is, obviously, if it's for a commercial, for a video publicity, for example, the audio has to be very much linked with the video, so it's part and parcel of the same thing. If you see that a person's far away from you, then you reduce the gain, and you give it a bit more space. You give the reverb a bit more of an effect, so that it gives the impression the person's a bit further away from you.
Further, right. Could we practice with my voice, for example?
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
see how you work with it? I'll read something,
absolutely, that's great.
narration.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it.
Wonderful.
Come on.
We're recording.
Okay, so I'm going to record a short story, not even 1 minute, and you can explain to me how you approach the voice and everything.
Absolutely, go right ahead.
Okay, let's see if I remember. It's called The Four Mistakes. It has some time now, but it goes something like this.
Creo que lo que voy a contar ahora no se lo he contado nunca a nadie. Tenía aproximadamente unos 12 años, quizás algo más, pero sinceramente no me acuerdo. Sí recuerdo que estábamos en un pueblo alejado de Madrid. Ahí nos reuníamos, por lo general, un montón de amigos, y hablábamos y charlábamos y bromeábamos, lo propio de la adolescencia. En esa reunión salió un tema en concreto, una broma, una aventura, una ilusión. Era ir de noche y a un antiguo hospital abandonado en la Sierra de Madrid.
Is that okay?
That's
Can you
fantastic.
work with that? So what did you find and do while I was recording?
Nothing. Basically, what I'm doing right now is, as you were talking, I was just listening to the pronunciation. If you're following the correct steps. In this case, when somebody's narrating something, important thing is that the pronunciation should be correct, the projection of the voice, that all those parameters should be correct. And I can tell you've done it more than once, because it sounds really good, with a natural tone of voice, and that's wonderful.
I have to ask, this is a Telefunken, right?
Yes.
It's a Canon.
Yeah. That's a Telefunken AR-51.
Could I see what you're going to do with my voice? What you
Yeah,
would
sure.
normally do?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, so this is it. This is what we recorded.
That's correct.
Can we hear it?
Yeah, sure. No problem. Let's have a little listen.
Creo que lo que voy a contar ahora no se lo he contado nunca a nadie. Tenía aproximadamente...
Listening to this, what would be the process you would follow?
Well,
A client asks for a narration from a choose voice's voice, and what would you do with it?
well, the first thing I do, as we spoke before, is I'll remove that residual, that stuff that we don't really want. So there are certain frequencies that, considering it's a voice, we don't really need them to be there. Especially a narrated voice, we don't want them. So again, I say the same thing again. There's no clear rule about this, but every person has their own style of doing things.
Right. Everyone has their own
That's
taste.
right. Okay.
What would be the treatment?
So we put in a bit of EQ. Let's equalize that a little bit. Let's have a look. Where do we have that? It's over there.
Okay.
Let's take an EQ. This is a 7-band EQ. And of course we have high pass and low pass filters.
Okay, very important, so that everyone knows. These softwares come with their own plugins, right? They can
Absolutely, yes, you can use them.
use them. We're talking about people that have a home studio.
That's right. The main thing is that you have to know how to use them. As we were speaking before, there's sort of residual, anything below 100 hertz, perhaps in a voice, we don't really need that.
Creo que lo que voy a contar ahora no se lo he contado nunca a nadie.
So I can tell a little bit of, let's just activate the high pass filter, about 80 more or less. We could clean your voice up a little. Let's just close that curve a little so that it sounds a little bit more natural.
Creo que lo que voy a contar ahora no se lo he contado nunca a nadie.
So we don't have that movement, we don't have that movement below the 100 hertz level, which usually is the one that sort of shakes the membrane a little bit, so it doesn't really help us, so we'll remove that. So anything below 80, just to keep that body of your voice.
In this case, you did a raw recording
I haven't
with no
put in any
plugins,
EQ.
right?
Correct. Another thing to keep into account is to maintain the definition of the voice, which is usually between 2,000 and 6,000 hertz. It depends again on the texture and the timbre of each person's voice. If we go, for example, to 5,000, which is somewhere in between 6,000, but maybe 5,000. And let's just lift it up a little bit on the 5,000, always keeping that curve, to keep the curve of the band, of the range, not to sort of shrink it too much, but just sort of at an intermediate level so we can attack a
More
greater
frequency
range. Just to be a bit more precise as well.
Creo que lo que voy a contar ahora no se lo he contado nunca a nadie.
Sorry. In this case, I don't want for the curve to be this way, but I prefer a bell curve.
With the shape of a bell.
Yeah, bell curve.
Creo que lo que voy a contar ahora no se lo he contado nunca a nadie. Tenía aproximadamente unos 12 años.
Let's deactivate it just to make sure.
Creo que lo que voy a contar ahora no se lo he contado nunca a nadie.
A little,
Sounds
a bit more
brighter.
definition. Okay.
More definition, right?
So let's keep in mind again the cleaning that we've done, the cleaning of the frequencies at 1 kilohertz or at 1,000 hertz. The voice sounds a bit more aggressive, usually, generally speaking. It's a frequency, for example, the guitars use a lot, and other instruments as well. But because it's just a voice in this case, voices at about 1,000 hertz tend to be a bit more aggressive, a bit more nervous. So if we can mitigate that a little bit, it would be better.
Always looking for the similarities with the original voice of the singer
That's right,
or actor.
exactly.
What's the...
No, go ahead.
Excuse me. What would be the biggest mistake you've ever heard in a recording?
The biggest mistake, the clicks. The sort of when it's oversaturated, when you don't control the gain sufficiently well, as one of the basic steps that you must take into account when you're recording yourself or another voice. When the initial gain is too high, and what you get is clips, and it sort of goes on the red.
I just remembered. What about people that have sibilant voices? Would you use de-esser for that?
De-essers. Yeah, we tend to use the de-essers for that. That's so that we can reduce that excessive use of the S's. Those are in very high frequencies, maybe around the sort of 16,000, and you've got to keep an eye on that.
1620, right?
1620, yeah, more or less. 20 is too high. When I say high, I mean high frequencies. Sometimes we get used to speaking in certain ways. Maybe not as much over there, but around 16,000, you tend to hear the S's a bit too much. 14,000, 16,000. Again, I always go back to the same thing. It depends. You're going to end up hating me.
I know.
It all depends on who and what you're doing.
Something else I wanted to ask you about, and I think a lot of people are asking themselves this as well. What about reverb?
Yeah.
A lot of people like reverb. And first time I used it, I was amazed and I wanted to hear my voice with a lot of reverb.
Of course.
But it's really important to be subtle when you use this plugin, right?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. You have to be quite subtle about it. Because the reverb is not only part of the mix. When you master it, which is the last part of the process, when you end up having the finished product, I'm talking about audio over here, excuse me, it's all magnified. And if you have a lot of reverb, which when you're listening to it, you think, okay, it sounds all right now. I've got a bit of reverb and I can hear it. And at times, it's better to have a little bit less of reverb at that point, because when you finish the process and you finish mastering it, it gets over magnified and it doesn't sound all right.
Anyway, and to finish, when it comes to the master, it's not really necessary to master the track when you send it to somebody.
No. Keep in mind something. If you're doing a recording, for example, like what you receive in your voice bank, you need a client that wants a voice. You get in touch with a voiceover artist and choose voices. What do? You tell that person to record their voice completely raw, no EQ, no compression, no passing through any, without even normalizing it, no reverb, like the beer without alcohol, nothing, clean, raw audio. Because that person, when he submits his work, he has to give the audio as clean as possible. Of course, he has to have mic technique, he has to keep
gain
the
entrance.
Initial gain under control. This signal should be clean, clear. Everything else should be everything should be clearly heard, should be able to be heard clearly. And then it's the other person's job to finish the project. You may realize, you may have the instance where the person asks you for a mixed audio, where, like what we just did right now, we could put a bit of EQ, a bit of compression, but no normalization, no mastering. Because when they insert the audio in the final project, they will master it.
And that would be doubling the effect.
And that's where we will generate a problem.